really happy to welcome to the show for the first time. She is the chair of the Africana Studies Department at Wellesley College. She's also the co-host of This Day, which is a this day in esoteric political history. And you get a podcast. Oh, you did a podcast, which is a podcast about Oprah. We're going to talk more about that. But I brought her here because she's written a couple of books on resistance, and the latest, We Refuse. You can pre-order it now. We Refuse: A Forceful History of Black Resistance. Let me welcome to the show the great Dr. Kellie Carter Jackson. Hi.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited.
I am too. There's been a lot of talk of Nat Turner. And Denmark Vesey and John Brown. There's been a lot of talk, as we all imagine ourselves as that if we were enslaved. But the reality is maybe, Dr. Jackson, that we would probably just be enslaved for generations the way our ancestors were. And there was nothing weak about them because resistance shows up in staying alive as well, which we don't talk enough about.
Yeah.
So you have the book before this one that's coming out, Force and Freedom: Black Abolitionists and the Politics of Violence. Yeah. What motivated this book? And there's a story out of there that we may not know.
There's so many stories. So I started this book when I was an undergrad at the best school in the whole wide world, Howard University. Shout out to my alma mater. I started as like my senior thesis. I was writing about John Brown, and funny that you mentioned him, and writing about how he's not really a leader. He's actually a follower. He's a huge follower and fan of Black leadership and Black politics. And so I write about how his actions really carried out a lot of the ideas that Black people have been ruminating about for a long time. So the book looks at basically a block of Black abolitionists that say or reason slavery starts in violence, slavery is sustained by violence, and slavery will only be overthrown with violence. And so I look at these Black leaders, both men and women, and I look at all the ways that they use force and violence to accelerate the abolition of slavery. And one of the stories I love to tell is a story about William and Eliza Parker. They were a fugitive couple, if you will. They were born in slavery, ran away from the state of Maryland to the state of Pennsylvania. And they set up their home right on the border of like Maryland and Pennsylvania to serve as like an underground like railroad hub. And they committed themselves and the community that they lived in to protect fugitive slaves, even at the risk of their own lives. And they meant it. Like there's a story where a slave catcher comes to William Parker's house and he takes like, a poker from the fireplace and like smacks the man across the face and basically says, "You won't get any slaves like over my dead body." There's other stories about how like a group of slave catchers and slaveholders come to the Parker's home looking for these 4 fugitive slaves that have run away. And they basically sound the alarm. They send for like 80 Black men, women, white and Black, that surround the home and confront these slave catchers and slaveholders. And at the end of the altercation, Edward Gorsuch, who's the slaveholder, is dead. Like he's been beaten up by his slaves. And one of the things I think that's so profound about that story is William Parker writes about like this altercation and them going back and forth. And when Edward Gorsuch gets beaten up by his own enslaved property and he's lying on the ground dying, and William Parker says, "And the women put an end to him." The women put an end to him. And I was like, this story is amazing. Like, I just don't think we hear enough of those stories of like forceful resistance, of how enslaved people and free people and fugitive people were fighting back and using violence if necessary.
We are conditioned to, we Black people, to not to be nonviolent. Martin Luther King, after he was dead, after he was murdered, not before. Before he was murdered, he was looked at as a pariah by both whites and Blacks, right?
Yeah.
Afterwards, oh boy, every street's going to be named for him because we got to celebrate this nonviolence because we cannot have people leading into violence, right? Mm-hmm. Because if people use violence to free themselves, then that's going to be a problem.
Yes.
But you wrote 2 books now. So clearly you
I
so
kind of debunked that just a little bit. I pushed back. I mean, I'm not advocating for violence. Let me say that again. I am not advocating for violence, but I do think that it is worth interrogating how force, because I don't necessarily think that force is violence, although violence is always forceful. I don't necessarily think that we have fully understood what nonviolence means. And I don't think we have appreciated sort of the tools of force and what that can allow people to accomplish. I think that sometimes marches and protests are successful. I think sometimes boycotts are successful. And I also think there are times and instances when, property destruction and taking to the streets gets more answers than peaceful protest does. It's MLK who said a riot is the language of the unheard. A riot is the language of the unheard. And what he was basically saying is like, you want to know why these people in the streets, you want to know why they're upset, because you have not addressed their grievances. And this is the result. And so I have found that throughout history, force and violence actually gets more of an effective response than nonviolence does. And so I want to sort of tease that out and say, why is that? We have not had an honest telling of American history.
Well, there is a saying, an adage: power never gives out power without a fight, right?
Yeah. Power concedes nothing without demand. Yeah.
Hey, it's unfair that you're in this condition. Let me share this land with you. We know we took the land from you, but the Native American, instead of pushing you off, hey, let's divvy up, the country and make it fair. No one's doing that. Right? As we live on colonized land, right? Native Americans once occupied, no one's taken to the streets on their behalf because they don't have the force to be able to take it back. And many of us would be fighting against them if that were to happen. Like it's weird,
it's complicated.
It's complicated though. It's not really.
It's complicated, but I also think that, we just need more expansive ways to understand that. I think oftentimes, we give people these 2 options. Are you going to be violent or are you going to be nonviolent? Violent or nonviolent? And I think that those options are too limiting. And I think that, my book engages the different ways that Black people have resisted. Part of that is through revolution. Part of that is through protecting their community. Part of that is through using force. Some of that is flight. Black people like to leave a situation that does not serve them.
We like to leave. It's like sometimes there's no option.
Yes, and flight is a form of resistance. If you, sort of withhold your labor, if you withhold your presence, I mean, there was a huge movement in the 1960s to go back to Africa, to leave the United States altogether. There was the Great Migration, was all about Black people leaving an oppressive South and going to the North. We've seen the reverse migration, where people like my parents have moved back to the South. Black people are always in search of places where they can sort of be and belong. And flight, I think, is a part of that resistance. And the last chapter I look at is really joy, how Black people use joy as a weapon. And I think, to me, that's one of the most potent tools. Like when I think about the Montgomery Brawl that happened in the dock in Alabama, there was a lot of resistance there, but mostly it was joy. When we were all on our phones hollering with laughter about the gifts and the memes, there is joy in resistance. There is joy in Black culture and Black humanity. And I think that is one of the most powerful tools we have, is our joy.
We were talking with Dr. Kellie Carter Jackson. The new book is We Refuse. On the cover is a beautiful Black woman with hair raising up to the sky and coiffed. Oh my goodness. With a gun, dressed in all white with a gun.
Yeah.
That was a
powerful cover.
Yes, Dr. Jackson. Intentional? Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to shout out the artist, Taha Clayton. Taha Clayton is his name. You can follow him on Instagram. He made this beautiful portrait. And if you see the actual portrait, I mean, it's like the size of a wall. It's huge. And one day my publisher was going to a gallery. He saw this painting and he said, "Oh, that's Kellie's book cover. Like clear as day. And he showed it to me and I was like, oh my gosh, it is so arresting. It is so striking. I love that this beautiful Black woman who's dressed in white, who has, a rifle in her hands, who is someone who means business, but yet behind her is sort of like a laundry line. Like she is doing the work of sort of domestic labor. And at the same time, she is ready to go if anything pops off, not just a person, could be a wild animal, doesn't matter. Like she is ready to go. And I think so much of that symbolizes or encapsulates the experiences of Black women. We are multitaskers, right? We are doing multiple things all at once, but we are always keeping an eye out for harm, for danger, for things that are not right. It was, I believe, Fannie Lou Hamer who said, I keep a shotgun in every corner of my house. And there were reasons for her to have that shotgun. And I think it's important to have a discussion about why that shotgun was needed.
Dr. Jackson, we refuse a forceful history of Black resistance. Give us a story of someone that, because I hear about Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, John Brown, who, of course, very complicated figure. They all lost. Was there someone who won a resistance?
I will tell a sort of complicated story. I'll try to reduce it very simply, of someone that one-ish. Can I say that? One-ish?
Damn it, not an ish. Okay.
There was in Washington, D.C. in 1919, a race riot that took place. And it was massive. It took place over the course of about 4 days. It involved thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people that, sort of started with the rumor, like a lot of race riots did, a rumor about a Black man, misspeaking to a white woman. And during this time, it was a post-World War I moment. A lot of Black veterans and soldiers had returned to Washington, D.C. And when this riot pops off and white, mobs are attacking Black communities, the Black communities and a lot of the veterans who lived in those Black communities were not going to stand for it. And so they start to fight back. They set up barricades in the Black communities. They're fully armed. They're going to Baltimore to buy more guns to make sure they can protect their community. But one of the stories within that story that stuck out to me is a young 17-year-old girl named Carrie Johnson. Carrie Johnson is at home with her father, and she's looking out the window and she sees white mobs attacking her community, literally going house to house, destroying homes, firing shots. And Carrie, at 17, goes to the roof of her house with a shotgun and starts to pick off white mobbers that are coming down this Black neighborhood, destroying and killing Black people. And I was like, what 17-year-old girl is doing this? And when she realizes that, she's being targeted, people start to point up to the roof and saying there's someone on the roof. There's a sharpshooter on the roof. She goes back into her house and she hides under the bed with her father. And in that moment, police enter their home. They don't identify themselves. They just bust down the door looking for anyone. And they enter the bedroom where Carrie and her father are hiding under the bed. And when they enter the room and don't identify themselves, Carrie's father was like, listen, girl, you better shoot to kill. And she shoots those police officers. She shoots a detective and she actually kills him, which is wild. The crazy thing is, she gets arrested, they go to court, she gets acquitted for self-defense. And I was like, what, in 1919, a Black girl that kills a cop and gets acquitted for self-defense is unheard of. And the crazy thing is, there were poems written about this girl in 1919. Young Black girls in Baltimore are like, you are my hero, you are my shero. It's stories like that I'm just like, why don't we know about Carrie? Why don't we know about these moments?
I want to have you back on more frequently if you will come through.
Kellie. Oh, absolutely. It would be my pleasure.
Right.
Yes.
All right. Because I like this. Your energy is sickening. So I love that too. Now you have a podcast. You did a podcast, which is hilarious. Just really quickly, we got a little bit of time. What made you want to do a podcast about Oprah Winfrey? First of all, thank you, because as time goes on, we'll forget her impact.
Oh, yeah.
Because nobody's going to chronicle it. And
my niece is 17 and she said, who's Oprah? And I was like,
what?
my pearls. Like, you know, she was not aware of her significance. And that just was not acceptable to me. So part of the reason I started the podcast was because I was a huge Oprah fan. And me and my bestie, Leah, we wanted to sort of relive some of these iconic moments that you think of. You know, Oprah covers the LA riots. Oprah interviews Toni Morrison. Oprah has this interview with Tom Cruise. Oprah's always giving like the best interview. She's got her book club. She's giving away cars. Like her journey as like a TV show host is iconic, and she stands the test of time. There are a lot of, you know, daytime talk shows in the 90s and the 2000s that don't have the sort of longevity that Oprah had, and Oprah becomes a kingmaker. You know, she has the Midas touch. And I think younger generations, Gen Zers, they're not familiar with Oprah. They don't understand her significance. And so, you know, we want to use this podcast to remind them. So it's a lot of fun. We go down rabbit holes and talk about everything you can imagine.